Hello, and welcome to the Sound Up Seattle podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Seattle and Washington sports. I'm your host, Tyler Cartwright, joined as always by my co-host,
John Carey.
And we are here today with quite a bit of Seattle Seahawks free agency news, Seattle Seahawks offseason news. That's going to be the main thing we talk about today, obviously. There's been a flurry of moves by the Seahawks, and we'll get to all of them, at least we hope so. Maybe they'll make another move while we're recording, as it seems like they've been doing all day. But for now, it is Wednesday, March 12th at 7:30 p.m. Central Time, because that's what I'm seeing right now on my computer. So, if anything happens after that, don't get mad at us. But anything to say, John, before we get started?
Yeah, just that, tons of Hawks, but we also have a lot of Zags to talk about. We're going to touch on everything else, as always. I also don't like this Central Time bias. I'm
looking at my computer, brother.
Or die. But yeah, let's dive in.
All right, here is some Coyote Picnic. All right, John, let's dive right into it. So last week, the only thing that we had heard, so this was 1 week ago, did we record a day late? It was March 6th, I believe.
That sounds right.
DK had requested a trade from the Seahawks, and that was kind of the only news we had heard. We saw Tyler Lockett getting released, and there had been some other, contract free-ups in terms of the Seahawks releasing a few more players, but no moves had been made. And since then, there's been just so much going on. Do you want to break it down and just let the audience know what's going on?
Yeah, hell has broken loose. It's been a flurry of a week, a lot going on. First thing I want to do is pat ourselves on the back for nailing the DK trade. Pittsburgh was mentioned. It wasn't one of the first teams we mentioned. I think we'll talk about why that might be a little bit of a surprise, but DK was given his exit from Seattle. He was traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers for his second-round pick. We called the value there. Good for us. And then we were, there were some rumors that, part of the reason DK wanted out is because the team was shopping Geno and he didn't want to, stick around for a rebuild. And that turned out to also be true. Geno Smith sent packing to the Las Vegas Raiders for a third-round pick. And that is a hell of a week. That's a whole week of content for us to talk about, and we're not even done quite yet. It's really interesting reading, just prepping for this pod. I read all sorts of stuff after the Geno and DK trades, but before this last part we're going to talk about. And it was really interesting. A lot of people were like, good value on the returns, but what are they going to do now? Are they going to start Sam Howell all year? This was a questionable move. No. The third blockbuster move was signing Sam Darnold, the free agent quarterback out of Minnesota, to a 3-year, $100 million deal. Crazy. I don't even really know where to start with this. So that's what happened. Where would you like to start on this discussion?
The first thing that I want to talk about, and just the first point that I want to get across, is the Geno trade, because some people might look at that and say, hey, the Seahawks didn't get a lot for Geno Smith, who is probably the 15th to 10th best quarterback in the NFL right now. He's very good, very consistent, and as a guy, we didn't really get to see all of the things that he was capable of because of our offensive line. But I think you look at that and you think the Raiders kind of knew that the Seahawks, Geno was going to be a $44 million cap hit to this team and just really take a lot of their value from in terms of signing free agents and things like that. And I think the Raiders knew that. They said, hey, we can use that as leverage, send them a third rounder instead of a second or something like that. So it feels like not a lot of value, but really it's a salary dump. We hate those here because of the Mariners, but in the Seahawks case, it does make a lot of sense. They didn't have any room to work and build this team in a new way. And so the lifting of Geno from this roster was necessary for them to actually field a competitive team this year.
Yeah. Just touching on that as well, it's just worth noting for any NBA fans out there, just how draft equity, how different it is in the NFL compared to other sports. There are so many positions, on a 50-man roster, so many players that play in every single game. First, second, third, really all the way down to fourth round picks are all plug-and-play starting caliber guys. This is not the NBA. This is not the NHL where later-round picks have almost no value. And, Rudy Gobert gets traded for 4 firsts. If Patrick Mahomes got traded tomorrow, he would probably go for a first and a second, maybe 2 firsts. But that's just the value of first-round picks in the NFL. They're incredibly valuable. And particularly considering, with quarterbacks in particular, the difference between a cheap young quarterback and an incredibly expensive older quarterback, the value's shifted even more. So I agree. In ideal circumstances, maybe you get a second round pick for Geno, but he was never going to be a first round pick guy. That's just not who he is in the NFL. So I was pretty happy with the third, and this is my biggest reason for being happy is when you look at Geno leaving and Sam coming in. Let's just talk to statistics for 1 second. We can talk more about this. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about Darnold. But Geno last year, 70% completion, 43-20 yards, 21 touchdowns, 15 picks, 7.5 yards per attempt. Last year, Sam Darnold, 66% completion, so 4% less on completion percentage. Still very high. Geno led the league at 70. Sam's at 66. 4,319 yards. That's 1 fewer yard. 35 touchdowns, which is 14 more than Geno Smith threw, and 12 interceptions, which is 3 less than Geno Smith threw, 8 yards per attempt. Statistically, there's no question that Sam Darnold had a significantly better season last year. We can get into the ins and outs, but I think most people would say roughly equitable quarterbacks. I don't think there are many people out there that could say with true confidence that one is definitely better than the other, particularly considering they've had similar stories, being, early picks that faded, found a new spot on a new team and kind of shined. But fairly equitable. Geno was asking for $45 million a year. They signed Sam Darnold for $30 million a year. They are saving $15 million a year and acquired a third-round pick in the NFL draft, which is a very valuable pick, for basically a quarterback that you could say is equitable. I think that is a massive win.
Yeah, I think it's a win. The one thing that I would note with the difference between Geno and Sam Darnold is the longevity of success when it comes to Geno's been doing this kind of rate, this quality of play for a few years now with the Seahawks. And there's some talk about he kind of started with Carroll, was a backup, and then ended up coming in when we traded Russ. But Geno as a guy, he's proved it. I think he's going to be good this year. I think he's going to be good the next couple of years. Is he worth that $45 million contract? To the Seahawks especially, who need that money to compete and decided to kind of go in a different direction, I don't think so. Especially, they would have reworked his contract so that it would have been a different cap hit this year. But that $45 million, if you just take that and change that into Sam Darnold's contract, that's a $12 million decrease for a 7 years younger player who has the potential, like you were saying, to be better than Geno Smith if you put him in the right system, like what we saw in Minnesota last year. Now, Minnesota, we could talk about the changes that Darnold is going to have to deal with when it comes to throwing for the Seahawks versus Minnesota. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, those guys are very, very good receivers in the NFL. That's like the best receiver in the NFL and then like a tier 3 receiver in the NFL. Like those are very good receivers. JSN is probably better than Jordan Addison, I would say, but like we don't really have another weapon besides that as of right now, and we'll talk about some other stuff that happened. But I think it's going to be tough for Darnold to really, really prove himself unless we can kind of take this offense and shape it in a real way around a new offensive line that, like, similar to the Vikings. The Vikings have such a solid offensive line. So Darnold, I would expect to take a step backward. The question is how much, and how can the Seahawks mitigate that step backward?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in football last year, just the numbers he was putting up. Clearly, he will not do that in Seattle for a litany of reasons. But I do think it's worth, when we're talking about comparing the two statistically from last year, it's worth noting that, obviously Sam was in a far better position, way better offensive line, better running game, and better receivers, probably better coaching offensively as well. But Geno had DK Metcalf and JSN and Tyler Lockett. Justin Jefferson's obviously probably the best or second best receiver in the NFL, depending on how you feel about Jamar Chase. But I would say both of those guys are better than Jordan Addison. So, kind of a 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So, Geno had a lot of talent too. And for me, I made the equitable point because in terms of value, I do think they're about equitable. So saving the money and getting the pick is a clear win to me. But you're right. To me, Geno is a completely known commodity. And I don't think that commodity is worth $45 million a year. He is not a quarterback, in my opinion, that's going to lead a team to a Super Bowl. He's a quarterback that could be carried to a Super Bowl by an awesome defense and some really good skill position guys. He can be that kind of guy. Really hard to build that team around a $45 million guy. That's why the Geno Smith types that win Super Bowls are typically young quarterbacks on their, cheaper deals. Sam, one great point, cannot be overstated, 7 years younger. People forget how young Sam Darnold is because he came into the NFL really young, burned out immediately, and has been just kind of trotting around the last couple of years. But is he 28 now? Is he our age?
Yeah, I believe he's 28 this year.
Yeah, insane. So he's a very, very young guy. He's, no reason to think he's not continuing to improve. So I really like that aspect of it. Geno's going to be 37 when, I should say, he'll be 35 when his contract finishes, and he'll probably get signed for a 2 to 4 year deal after that by the Raiders. So he's going to be 37, 38 when he's finishing up. Darnold will be 31 when this contract finishes up, which will put us in a great... And this is the thing with Darnold. It's either going to go great, in my opinion, or it's going to go horribly, in my opinion. Either one is kind of a win for the Seahawks. If it goes fantastic, we're going to have the opportunity to re-sign a 31-year-old who's proved it for us.
Yeah.
If it goes terribly, clearly this team is making moves to rebuild. We just traded our quarterback and best wide receiver, or second best wide receiver. If he's awful, then we'll kind of tank next year and have a high pick and maybe go and draft a quarterback. I do think Sam Darnold has a way lower floor than Geno, but I also think he has a much higher ceiling. I do think, from what I saw from Sam last year, I think he's a guy that can lead a team to a Super Bowl. I think he's that kind of talent.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is you think about it. I was thinking about this because I was reading on Twitter today. It's like Brock Purdy going into free agency. Is he worth a maximum contract? It's like his rookie deal is now up and he's kind of online for an extension or next contract. And they were like, is this guy worth $55 million? Is this guy as good or better than Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, those guys who signed deals with teams and everybody's like, why did you do that? These people are questioning these teams' decisions. And it's like, do we think that Geno Smith is as good or better than Trevor Lawrence? It's like maybe he's proven it, but it's like, is he worth that to the Seahawks who, I don't think he could lead you to a Super Bowl like you were saying. It's like that money could be allocated in a much better way. And I think going for Sam Darnold, you get that middle ground of like, hey, even if he's bad, we can still draft a quarterback next year. If Correct. He's good, like you said, if he's good, he'll lead us to the playoffs. He could maybe lead us to a Super Bowl depending on how you build around him on the offense and defensive side of the ball. So I think it gives the Seahawks situational flexibility. It's not like they want to choose one or the other. It's like, hey, if this guy performs, we can do great things. If he doesn't, then we'll deal with that and we'll draft a QB next year and do all those things. So it gives them situational flexibility, I think is a good way to put it. So I appreciate the deal for what it is. I think a lot of people are like, this doesn't make the Seahawks that much better. And it's like, I don't think it really changes the Seahawks that much purely looking at the quarterback, but it gives them that flexibility as an organization that I think a lot of teams don't have right now.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I do just kind of think Geno, I guess, one, I want to address an excellent point you made, which is that the reason Geno Smith is clearly better right now than Tua or Trevor Lawrence or probably Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
That's not the reason those guys are getting $50 million deals. It's because they're young and teams are hoping that, over the next 3 years, they can develop into a Super Bowl winning type quarterback. Geno, say what you will, it's amazing the comeback story he's had. He's really proved himself as a starting caliber NFL guy. at best, he's kind of a Phillip Rivers type where, I'm not sure anybody's super confident that he's going to win 3 straight playoff games. He's definitely not going to get better in his age 35 to 38 years. So that's the reason, if they would have paid him something like that, that would have been, I think, incredibly dangerous. And Sam Darnold versus Trevor Lawrence, who's going to be better over the next 3 years? Flip a fucking coin. Like, there's no reason to be like, oh, definitely one versus the other. And we're getting Sam Darnold for $20 million less a year than Trevor is getting. It can't be overstated that, this happens. I think, especially in the NFL, we throw these rookie quarterbacks out there, often on the New York Jets, and it's a disaster. And people are like, okay, throw them in the trash and let's move on. And then the quarterbacks turn 24 years old and are like, you remember being 24? Like, goodness gracious. Maybe give them a couple years to figure out the toughest position in professional sports. So it's not surprising that a guy like Sam Darnold is finally kind of putting it together. This guy won the Heisman. He was like the number 2 pick in the draft. He was excellent last year on the Vikings and would have been signing a $45 million a year contract, except for the fact that he completely shit the bed in the last 2 games of the season.
Yeah,
that's our gain. That's $15 million a year we saved because he had 2 bad games. He went 14-3, had 2 bad games, and we get to profit off of that disappointment. So, once again, I do think Geno is so steady Eddie that, definitely more confident that he will have a good year next year than I am that Sam will. But Sam has a higher ceiling and a lower floor. And for a team in the position the Seahawks are in, Geno's poison. That guy's going to keep us going, 5-12 every year, and we're never going to get a really good pick. Like, say what you will about Geno, but he's that competent. He's going to keep you from a really high pick, but he'll never get you to the heights. Like, that's poison to me. Give me a guy that's going to destroy this team or elevate it. Don't just keep him in the middle.
There is a question, and we don't have to belabor this topic, but there's a question of if Sam Darnold is basically just Geno Smith 2.0 for the Seahawks right now too, where it's like, hey, we picked him up after he had one good year as a starter, and he's been basically a journeyman backup for a while. It's like this guy could have learned a lot over the last few years, and now he's in a place where he can shine, and maybe his ceiling is that much higher than Geno's, and it's like, this could be a really great signing, and I think you can't hold out hope that like Sam Darnold or Geno Smith does the same thing he's been doing for the last 2 years until he's 38. Like that kind of thing puts you in a situation that you don't want to be in if you're an organization. So
yeah, and to your point again, I just timeline wise, I think this is great. We have him on a 3-year team friendly deal. We're gonna have 3 years to rebuild this team in Mike McDonald's image. After that 3rd year, if Sam's been great, we'll re-sign him to a lot of money. If he's been bad, we will probably move on or have moved on already. And if he's been mid, we can kind of do exactly what we just did to Geno. Maybe trade him for a 5th-round pick to some team on an expiring deal and find the next guy, I think you said the word, and I think it's flexibility. I think this set of moves has given Seattle a ton of flexibility.
Yeah. All right. Now, along with just those 2 people that we were talking about with Geno and Sam, DK Metcalf traded the Seahawks for a 2nd-round pick. He agreed to a 5-year, $150 million extension basically as soon as he got there. How did you feel about that? Were you okay with that as a Seahawks fan? Did that surprise you? What did you think?
It did not surprise me. I was surprised it was Pittsburgh for a couple of reasons. And I want to talk about, with both him and Geno, how we see them fitting in their new spots. But just in terms of the trade itself, value was right on point. I would have been disappointed with a 3rd. I would have been gobsmacked with a 1st. So the 2nd-round pick is appropriate. And to be honest, seeing him put his name on a 4-year, $132 million extension, that scares the shit out of me. And it makes me really glad that we weren't the team that offered it to him, because we've had this conversation about DK, man. Like, he's super talented, but he's very volatile and he's very limited. And do you want to pay that guy like a top receiver? And now he's being paid like one.
Yeah, I think the combination of him and George Pickens too. Like seeing the Steelers go for that is an interesting one too, just with their receiving core. Like you just said, I don't love it in terms of the contract, like annual value.
Yeah.
And I don't know. DK as a player, he has his ups, he has his downs. But I think if you're gonna be the Steelers, and you've got George Pickens, who they're literally the same guy. Like I don't really know what else to say other than these players perform the exact same thing on the football field. There's going to be no one that can catch the ball within 10 to 20 yards of the quarterback. It's basically just them running straight lines down both sides of the field, and a tight end who's going to be trying to turn around and catch the ball at the 5-yard line. That's going to be their offense.
A lot of streaks out there for Pittsburgh, which is interesting. It is an interesting combination because one, you're putting together two of the most inconsistent great receivers in the NFL in terms of production. You know, both guys can have absolutely monster games and then next game have, one catch for 5 yards. Both guys are definitely hotheads. I'd be scared to be a cornerback in the AFC North right now. It's going to be you're going to catch a fist whatever side of the field you're on. In terms of, they kind of play the position very differently. Obviously, Pickens is more of a hands, speed guy, and DK is more of a size guy. But yeah, they're both running a lot of streaks. I can't imagine Pickens is going to play much in the slot now that they have DK. So it will be interesting to see how they fit. But just an interesting combination. I kind of get it. Now they have two real guys. Whatever quarterback they end up with, the Steelers, it's obviously they haven't settled on somebody, but whoever they have will have no excuses with those two on the field and that offensive line. But yeah, I'm glad I didn't have to pay him $132 million. Another thing too is, he's now under contract for the next 5 years. They're going to have to pay Pickens in a year or two.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a lot of money going to
He
receivers.
might honestly be their like Pickens future replacement. Like they might just let Pickens go.
Yeah, that's completely fair. But then the situation is like, am I sure that DK Metcalf is better than George Pickens? I guess the game-to-game performances have been better than Pickens, but I don't. Yeah,
I think you look at the stats that DK gets you on an annual basis. You say, he's probably better than Pickens consistently. But Pickens, I believe, is younger. So who knows?
Way younger. Yeah. He was a 2022 pick. So he's interesting. But I was very glad for the value. We've talked about kind of the DK paradox before. Him and Geno are kind of in the same boat where it's like, they're both great, but they're good enough to be paid more money than I feel comfortable paying them.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad we got out of that business. Kind of along the same lines, love to DK. Man, he had a lot of great games in Seattle. He could be frustrating at times, but he also had some amazing moments. I'm not happy to see him out the door.
Yeah.
I thought he was a really good Seahawk, and I really liked him. Geno, absolute pros pro. One of the most beloved by teammates guy it seems ever. It seems like everybody just has amazing things to say about Geno. So we'll be sad to see him go as well. How do you feel like he's going to fit in Las Vegas?
I think Geno will fit decently in Vegas. I know, being reunited with Pete Carroll, I'm sure he's happy about. That's his dude. And this is something that I was hoping that the Seahawks would address more of, and I think we'll talk about this more later when it comes to drafts and things like that. But like having Brock Bowers, who is one of, if not the best tight end in all of the NFL, is really nice for Geno. Geno, if he needs it, he's got an amazing check down guy, similar to how he used JSN, but just like a more physical guy that doesn't have to run routes. He's kind of a push and then break out for 5 yards. That's a great fit for Geno because they basically don't have any other huge receivers. Have they signed anybody else? I can't think of anybody. All I can think is Devontae Adams right now, but he's with the Rams, and he was with them last year.
Yeah, they might draft a receiver in the draft. We'll see what they end up doing.
Yeah, they do have the number 6 pick, right?
Yeah, and they need help everywhere. They won't use that pick. I don't think there are any receivers worthy of a pick that high, but they need a lot of help. But yeah, I mean, they will get him some help, and they have some talented guys already on the offensive side. Brock Bowers is definitely the interesting one. That will be an interesting fit because he had the best rookie tight end season ever, being thrown the football by by Aiden O'Connell and the ghost of what's his name, Jimmy Garoppolo.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Gardner Minshew. I thought you forgot Gardner Minshew's name.
Oh
And
yeah,
I was like, brother.
and Gardner Minshew. Yeah, my former Colt. So I think the absolute world of Brock Bowers. I'll just say I have him on my dynasty fantasy football team, and this Geno trade has hit double for me because not only do I think it's good for the Hawks, but massive for Brock Bowers owners out there to have a real quarterback for him. But it will be interesting just because Geno hasn't historically thrown a ton to tight ends.
I was going to say that. He's more of a deep ball guy.
Yeah, he's never had a talent like this, so I'm sure they'll be fine, but it'll be different for both of them. And then also I think it's going to be a real kind of show up or shut up for Geno when it comes to red zone offense because, a big part of his struggles, he threw a lot of end zone picks last year. Probably 5 out of those 15 picks took place in the end zone. And, 21 touchdowns was disappointing for a guy that threw for 4,000 yards. Now you have, probably the best red zone threat in terms of positional offense, a great tight end. We saw it with, Travis Kelce forever, Rob Gronkowski forever, Jimmy Graham forever. The great tight ends, Antonio Gates, they make red zone offense so much easier.
Yeah.
And Bowers should catch 10 touchdowns this year with his talent level and the lack of other talent on offense. And this should help Geno's red zone issues. But if it doesn't, then, that'll make me even more glad that we didn't. Yeah, it'll make me very glad we didn't give him $45 million a year. So, kind of an interesting fit for Geno. They need to do a lot of work on that line and get him some more help at running back and at receiver. But, getting back with Carroll is great, and Bowers is a good fit.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to some of the other signings that the Seahawks have made. A couple guys who are returning who were on the free agent market. We've got Ernest Jones IV. We really liked him. I was a big fan of him. We got him from the Titans last year in the trade for Jordan Brooks. Signed him to a 3-year, $33 million deal, as well as defensive tackle Jaron Reed, who had a 3-year, $25 million deal signed. Returning 2 guys that were pretty important to this defense, and obviously Mike McDonald would want that. As the defensive-minded coach that he is, I think that you can get the sense of what he's trying to build with the moves that the Seahawks are making here. So just a really solid interior, or I guess front 7, I guess you could say. And then they also, I think today, signed defensive end DeMarcus Lawrence, who's a kind of a longtime Cowboy, for a 3 years, for up to $42 million deal. That's with incentives and stuff. He's guaranteed $16 million during those 3 years. He's a guy who dealt with a little bit of injury, so we maybe got him on the cheap as well. So just in terms of building that interior of the defense, it feels like they spend a lot of good money on that, and it's not too much. It's that money that they freed up from Geno and DK and Tyler Lockett. Those guys all getting axed. That money went to the defense and then a couple more guys. But it's been a nice start in terms of building the defense. We've got a couple moves on the offensive side of the ball that we'll talk about, but I want to hear your thoughts on the defensive side first.
Yeah, on the defensive side of the ball, obviously, we really like some of their high-end defensive line talent already. Byron Murphy had a really nice year last year, all things considered. But just getting some depth pieces, I think. DeMarcus Lawrence has been just a steady Eddie Pro for the Cowboys for a long time. I think he's going to slot in great. Jaron Reed, I think, is really good and really underrated. To get him for a $25 million deal, I think is very reasonable. I think a lot of depth pieces. And, a big part of this, too, is, you can sign these guys because you have $15 million more dollars a year by keeping away from Geno and going with Sam Darnold. So I just think it's nice kind of immediately seeing some of the dividends of savings at quarterback. Defensively, I think this helps a lot. I think, we'll talk about the offensive side as well, but by addressing some of these holes immediately on defense, I think it's going to make them, back to that word again, flexible in the draft. They have a lot of draft. We'll talk about the picks that they have, but their ability to kind of fill in some of those holes on the defensive line is going to make it easier for them to take best player available in the draft as opposed to just drafting for need.
For sure. And then in terms of the offense, today, I believe as well, they signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling, a guy who was a Chief for a while and then bounced around between the Bills and the Saints over the last couple of years. We signed him for 1 year, up to $5.5 million. Again, obviously with incentives. And then offensive tackle Josh Jones, they signed for 1 year, up to $4.75 million. Those are two nice additions in terms of the offense. I think Marquez Valdez-Scantling is kind of a third receiver. You would think, looking at this offense right now, he basically fills that DK Metcalf role, and he's a guy who, with the addition to Clint Kubiak, he was with him last year, and really I think Valdez-Scantling played really well for the Saints last year. Statistically, I think he played in 9 games and had 4 or 5 touchdowns. That's a good number. So I think he's a nice addition to this team. We'll see how he fits with this Clint Kubiak style offense, but overall I like him a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, I love a incentive-laden contract for guys like this that are very boom or bust. Yeah, you said it. Scantling should be your 3rd or 4th receiver, but he's a great speed guy. That's really all he is a down-the-field streaker, which is, just kind of a poor man's DK in a lot of ways. And, it gives them flexibility. I do think in the draft with their litany of picks, they should look at receiver. I think a big part of that is to take some pressure off JSN so he can continue to develop and to give us a better real look at Sam Darnold. But now that you have JSN, who is your slot guy, and we have seen can really be a slot stud in the NFL, and you have MVS on the outside speed guy, gives you flexibility now that you're looking for your new number 2. He could be another down-the-field speed guy. You can always run them on either side of the field. It can be more of a big body contested catch guy. It can be a lot of different things. So I really do like the MVS contract. Hopefully it ends up being more like $3 million. I can't imagine he'll crack all those incentives. And then Josh Jones, he's not special on the offensive line, but he gets the job done, and we could use 6 more guys like him. So I love to see it, but obviously there's more help to be done there. But two big needs and 2 pretty reasonable contracts. A lot more money committed to the defense and the defensive line specifically than those signings. But that's how they're hoping to win games, is by dominating the defensive line. That's obviously a Ravens mentality that I'm sure McDaniels has. I am McDaniels. That's not right.
McDonald. You're good.
Mike McDonald. One thing that I do think is interesting, MVS, obviously, they didn't invest a lot of money in him or anything, but with the acquisition of Sam Darnold and signing a guy like MVS, Sam Darnold led the NFL in down-the-field throws of 20 yards or more last year. I know that's not really ultimately where McDonald wants to go, so it's going to be interesting to see, as they build out the rest of this roster, how they kind of balance that. I guess I'll just, for the sake of the conversation, play a little bit of spoiler on the draft conversation, but there are some mock drafts. Seattle's currently picking 18, and there are some mock drafts out there that have them taking Emeka Mbuka. Gosh, is that what his name is? Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State, who's obviously awesome and, part of the long lineage of stud receivers out of Ohio State. Him and JSN, I'm sure, would be glad to be reunited. I think there's a lot of reasons that's a really good fit. Whether or not they want to take their first pick and commit it to receiver is something to be talked about. But Emeka's a stud, and he's going to be great in the NFL. The only issue with that is then if you have Emeka and JSN and Sam Darnold, this is going to be a down-the-field offense again, and I'm not sure that's what our head coach wants to run.
Yeah, I think there's a world where we go, our first 2 picks are just this draft is very deep at the tackle position, and the offensive tackle position specifically. And there's a world where the Seahawks just go, best available offensive tackle at both positions that they have, and just really try and shore up this front in terms of the offensive line, and then try and get a receiver later in the draft, because the receiving class is it's Tetsuya McMillan, was a great receiver at Arizona and was primed to have a better year than he did last year, but I think people really thought he was going to come into his own this year. And then after that, the receiving class falls off pretty hard. So I think they will probably go with best available, and then I think you can work with any receiver that you get. You can also, looking at a guy who just got released today, Cooper Kupp. He just got released by the Rams. Not that we would love to have him. He's very had a very injury-laden career, but he did just get released, and there's a deal there to be made if the Seahawks want it as a secondary piece, and if he has a full healthy season, that could be really nice. And if he gets injured, throw in Jake Bobo in there, and you're golden.
He's the coach Bobo needs to truly reach his potential. Now, Kupp's a great call. He'd be a guy that, not being the number one receiver would, I think, be good for him to be able to be play number two to JSN.
Yeah.
And a guy that can just be a great release valve for Sam Darnold, just a pro's pro who knows where to get on the football field.
Especially in an offense that he's not just like catching every single pass. Like Matthew Stafford basically went to him every time he could. And that, he put up stats. He had the one offensive player of the year, but it's like that takes a toll on a man's body. And if you don't have to do that, it'd be nice.
100%. So depending on the deal, I don't mind the idea of getting Kupp in. It's the paradox, the quagmire of offensive skill positions of like every year. I'm like, no, commit to the lines, use your draft capital on the offensive defensive line. It's like, ooh, we could get a Mecca at 18. I kind of like that. Probably best if they avoid drafting a receiver in the first round and instead really focus on the offensive line. But I think, we said it again. This team has a lot of flexibility. I just want to touch on it because it's another just big part of this win as I see it. The Seahawks draft picks currently, they're picking 18th in the first round, then they have 50 and 52 in the second round, 82 and 92 in the third round, and then a fourth, a fifth, a sixth from the Steelers, and 3 sevenths. So, not as important as we go down that list, but they're going to get 5 guys in the first 3 rounds. Those are all going to be really, really valuable contributors to this team. And the reason we have that is because we moved on from DK and Geno. So with those 5 picks, we should get 2 offensive linemen, maybe 1 receiver, and then 2 maybe best players available. That's what
I wouldn't be shocked if we took a running back at some point because that's just how John Schneider likes to play it. But
sure.
my buddy was like, we're going to get Genty and we're going to like it. And I was like, all right.
I don't want Genty at 18. This team's not ready for Genty. Genty needs to go to the Bears where he can have an offensive line.
Yeah.
It's just going to be interesting. There's a lot of ways this team can go. It's exciting to see all the moves they've already made. And I'm really pumped for the draft.
Yeah, I think what it is, and this can be our final discussion when it comes to the Seahawks for right now. The national media is like, what are the Seahawks doing? Why are they doing this? It doesn't feel like they're building their team up in a positive way. And I think what this is it's kind of like a really hard swing. It's like, hey, we might hit everything and draft really good offensive tackles, get a good receiver in the draft, and just like everybody works really well with this team, and we could easily make the playoffs this next year. Or like we said, Sam Darnold could suck and we'll win 3 games and get a really good draft pick. But it's like the Seahawks are primed to have both of those options be available. What we don't want to do is go 6-11 and be stuck in the middle. So I think what we'll see from this team early will decide a lot, and I'm really excited for the draft. Like you were saying, I think this draft is going to be very, very fun as a Seahawks fan base. So that's exciting moving forward.
Yep, reload time, baby. A lot to be determined, but a big week for the Seattle Seahawks, and my overall impression is very positive.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's talk what was the biggest win of the week in terms of Seattle sport or Washington sports. Break it down for me, John. How did the Zags do in the WCC tournament?
They did great. They did exactly what they needed to do. I am very pleased. They started the tournament with a 85-76 win over the San Francisco Dons. It's a very competitive first half that was not as competitive in the second half. Unbelievable. We have like an ongoing I believe it's now 33-game win streak against the Dons.
That's pretty wild, actually.
Yeah, it's been over 20 years since they've beaten us, which is they have been the third best program in the WCC, particularly since BYU left, and they've always been solid. They've never been at the bottom of the stack. And yeah, we've lost to Loyola, we've lost to Santa Clara a couple times. San Francisco just cannot get over the hump. So I feel the tiniest bit bad for them, but I also don't. Graham Ike and Caliph Battle were the stars of that show, tallying 27 and 21 points respectively. That was just a good, solid win. But the big win to talk about is, of course, the 58-51 slugfest between Gonzaga and St. Mary's.
I can't wait to talk about this game.
Yeah, in the WCC championship game. Coming in, we'd lost 2 straight to St. Mary's in the regular season. Going 0-3, I think, would have just broken my heart wide open. So this game was very important for my mental health. And we can talk outcomes of the game in a minute. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about in this game. Let me have it, Tyler. I know you have thoughts.
All right. The first thing that I want to talk about is our boy, Braden Huff. Braden Huff, I think we talked about last week or a couple pods ago, but we aren't really sure his role in this team and how he's filling it, and if he's the reason that they've been struggling this year, what's been going on. But let me tell you, this man dropped 18 points against a St. Mary's team who's number 19 in the nation right now. He hit the lone three-pointer of the game as the rest of the field went 0 for, 27? That includes all of St. Mary's three-point shots that did not go in. And then the Zags in their entire team went 1 for 15. So three-pointers were at a premium in this game. But Braden Huff, 18 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, a block. Like, just a really solid game by him, and probably his best game as a Zag that I can remember right now. So I wanted to talk about that before just absolutely destroying this offensive game, or the offense of this game, and just the fact that Gonzaga made 6% of their three-pointers and had the better three-point shooting percentage. I was talking with I think my family. We have, my brother's a Gonzaga guy, and they were just like, as long as they get it done. And I was like, if they get that kind of performance from this team going forward, it will be quite the doozy of a March Madness tournament as they get knocked out in the first round. So this team needs to improve their shooting, but obviously St. Mary's and them were willing to throw fists, and Gonzaga came out on top. So good for them.
Yeah, the three-point shooting in this game was just kind of unbelievable in general. It was the worst three-point shooting game in 6 years in D1 men's basketball. A combined 3.3% between the two teams. Only 1 3 made by our backup center. I'm not sure if they were playing with like triple rims out there or something to make it just impossible to hit threes. But it's worth saying, because it is true. That Vegas gym is not a shooter's gym.
Yeah.
Statistically, everyone does worse in that gym. All the baskets are really far from the ends of the arena, which I think can kind of throw off the visuals a little bit. But that does not excuse a 1 for 32 three-point shooting game combined. But that is just kind of fluky. It's worth saying that I think we really affected their three-point shooting because we were playing so physical and really on them. And we missed a lot of open threes or semi-open threes. And this is a team that shoots 35% from three, which is, very middle of the pack in terms of D1. But they're certainly not a great three-point shooting team, but they're not a bad three-point shooting team. An outcome like this is just a total fluke. So
let me say, you guys both look like UW out there.
Yeah, the fact that they were able to pull it out is very encouraging. But yeah, a lot of history being made. Like I said, 5 years, worst three-point shooting game. What Gonzaga did to set an D1 record. In the last 25 years, while they've been tracking this data, Gonzaga is the only Division I team to score under 60 points, shoot under 10% from three, and get out-rebounded by 15 or more rebounds and still win the game. Previous teams were 0 and 121 while classifying those marks. And the real reason for it was, our efficient in the paint scoring between, Huff and Caliph Battle attacking the rim and Ike, who didn't have a great game, but, was still able to do Ike things down low. And the main thing was the turnover margin. The turnover margin in this game was ridiculous. Our defense was scrambling like mad. We generated 15 turnovers to the Zags 4. 12 of those turnovers were steals. We had very active hands. Caliph Battle had 5 steals in this game. He was kind of the star in my opinion. Namhart had 3 and Braden Huff had 2 to lead the team. So our ability to turn the other team over is the reason the Zags won this game. I just want to shout out, obviously Braden was awesome. I think the best player in this game was Battle. He was just fearless attacking the rim. Obviously didn't hit any of his 4 3-point attempts, but was just going downhill all game. Only shot 3 free throws, which is ridiculous. I mean, the refs basically swallowed their whistles for long stretches. It was a very physical game. But his activity and his effort, particularly on defense, I think was the difference maker for this team. So, just a really, really big win. We only had 2 points from our bench. That was Ben Gregg. Dusty, Michael Ajayi, and Emmanuel Innocenti failed to score. But I was still really impressed with the defensive effort. One of the ugliest wins in the history of college basketball.
Yeah, what I will say about Caliph Battle is this is kind of what you guys, I don't want to say got him for, but like this was like what we expected from him. It was like when you need him to turn it on, he can turn it on. And yeah, like you said, 14 points, 6 of 14 shooting, but that's like, he's creating his own shots. He's taking tough ones and he's making, 14 points in college basketball is a good amount. To come up with 5 steals, 3 assists is good. Like that's a really good stat line for a college basketball game. And he really proved that he can turn it on in a way that I don't think we'd seen thus far this season. So I was really happy for him in that regard. And the Zags look like a little bit more of a threat than I think I had perceived them to be with the way they had been playing. I think they're kind of figuring out how to turn it on right now. So we'll see how it goes moving forward. But that's exciting for you guys.
Yeah, you nailed it. This is exactly why we got him. He was 0 for 4 from 3. So he was 6 of 10 in the paint, essentially. He didn't take any pull-up mid-range jumpers. And to do that against one of the biggest and most physical interior teams in college basketball, this St. Mary's team is huge. They have 2 7-footers on the court at all times. So I was really impressed with his ability to attack in transition and to attack out of sets. Yeah, we haven't had a guard like that as like physical as him really ever, with his obviously that alley-oop near the end of the game. You really saw it. He is big and strong he's an SEC guard. And I think his start to finish effort and start to finish involvement in this game we haven't seen yet. I think part of that is Few just being like slowly realizing that like, we need way less Hickman pick and rolls and way more Battle pick and rolls. And I think with that increased opportunity, you just saw him so much more engaged the entire game. Because the one thing you can say about Battle is he's kind of come and gone in certain games. But he was a real presence the entire time against St. Mary's, and we needed it. So that's very exciting. What this means for the team, we basically locked up an at-large bid before the tournament started. I wasn't worried about missing the tournament, but if we'd lost to San Fran, we probably would have been a 10 or something around there. If we'd lost to St. Mary's, we probably would have been an 8 seed. With this win, we are projected to be a 6 or a 7. I'd be shocked at an 8. I'd be a little surprised at a 6. I think 7 is probably where we will fall. I'd love to get a 6. I think this team deserves it. But obviously their record has its pros and cons, but nice end of the year, getting 2 more quad 1 wins. And they're now ranked 8th overall in the net and 9th in KenPom. So both of the primary advanced statistical rankings have Gonzaga as a top 10 team. So we'll see how low the committee feels comfortable putting them. But I would expect a 6 or a 7 seed, more likely than an 8. Exciting, man. Selection Sunday's coming up. Tournament's around the corner. I was joking with some friends about it, but this is the perfect time to be peaking, and it does 3-point shooting very much aside. There was a lot I really liked out of this game. Yeah,
I think it was a fun game for the Zags, and I really liked it for a good turnaround for their season that's been very much up and down so far. When it comes to UW, they finished last in the Big Ten and did not make the Big Ten tournament. I don't want to talk about it any more than that, so we're going to move on. And when it comes to Wazoo, I believe they lost in the WCC tournament to Santa Clara, who went on to play. Was Was Santa Clara the one who you guys played, or was it San Francisco? I get those two confused.
Yeah, so Wazoo lost to San Francisco,
Okay.
who then went on to lose to us. Santa Clara lost to Pepperdine, so shout out to Pepperdine for the early round upset. But ignominious end to the season for the Washington State Cougars. Welcome to WCC, baby. Get ready to run it back next year.
All right. Other than that, in terms of Mariners news, not much going on. We'll probably do our annual over-under podcast here pretty soon. Obviously, the season starts in 2 weeks, so that's exciting. But George Kirby is going to miss the start of the season with some shoulder inflammation. They did an MRI. There's supposedly nothing going wrong with that, but he's going to miss the start of the season, and that will likely mean that either Logan Evans or Emerson Hancock will be the fifth starter, and I would bet that it's Emerson Hancock just because he's been at the major league level and the team wants to start off hot. But Logan Evans will have an opportunity to prove himself over the start of the first couple months to see if he can kind of take over that extra starter spot from Emerson Hancock. But by then, Kirby should be back. I don't think it's going to be something where he's out for months on end. I think it'll be he might miss the first 3-4 starts, and then he should be right back in there and good to go once he ramps up.
Yeah, which is encouraging. When we were hearing the news early about Kirby's injury, I didn't think it was going to be a season-long thing at any point, but I was worried it might be a 4 or 5 month thing. Now it seems like that will not be the case. He'll be back in soon. And the nice thing about having one of the best starting rotations in baseball is we shouldn't feel the absence too badly at the start of the year. Yeah, we'll see. A lot of Mariners to talk about coming forward, but they might have to wait until after our March Madness bracket spectacular, which will probably have to come next week.
Yes.
Other than the Mariners, the Kraken have traded Tanev to the Winnipeg Jets. Any thoughts on that trade? Obviously, the big trades happened last week, but they continue to sell. Yeah,
so Tanev, expiring contract this year. He was going to be, he's I think 33, and we got him for a second rounder in 2027. So I really like Tanev. When I went to that Blues Kraken game a little while ago, I really liked just his presence on the ice and how he was playing in terms of hustle and grit. And I think he's just a really nice player. And the Jets get, they're 44-17-8, I believe, last time I looked. So they've probably improved since then. But the Jets are a really nice team, and he gets to go play for a Stanley Cup here. So that's good for him. In terms of the 2027 second rounder, that is nice. It adds to what I think it does what I think we were kind of expecting the Kraken to deal with, which is extending the rebuild a little longer than I think most people were thinking with those first couple picks that we had gotten from the trades last week. So if we end up not being that good for the next couple of years, we'll get a third rounder and it'll be okay. Or a second rounder in 3 years.
Yeah, yep. I just think, selling's good. Sell. Let's turn it into a fire sale. Second round picks are not as valuable in hockey. More of an NBA type format, but you can still get rotation guys in the second round.
Yep.
So an appropriate time to move on from a guy who's getting a little older and probably doesn't want to re-sign in Seattle. So I was happy with the second round pick.
Yes. And then one final thing that I'm going to bring up because I know you're excited to talk about it. The second biggest win in Seattle sports last week, the Seattle Sounders, whose season started on February 22nd, I believe. They just won against LAFC. John refused to talk about them until they did this because last season, I guess, I think they lost 5 games to LAFC.
4 or 5.
4 or 5. It was a rough year when it came to playing those LA teams. And the LA Galaxy were also very good as well. So that was a tough stretch for the Sounders, but they won 5-2 against LAFC last week, and Jordan Morris became the Sounders' all-time leading scorer. So a couple good things happening for the Sounders as their season ramps up. Anything to note, John? I know you're excited about that.
Yeah, well, it's just nice to be able to talk about them again. We were 3 games into the season, and I was staring at this LAFC game. I was worried if they hadn't beat them then, it was going to be a while before we got another shot at them. So nice to get the early win. They weren't at their full health, but it still counts, and I can still say neener to all my LAFC friends. Kind of a slow start to the year for Seattle. Obviously, a lot of various tournaments and stuff going on, but they are 1-1-1 with a win against LA, a loss to Real Salt Lake, and a tie with Charlotte. So we will see how their season develops as things get further underway. But nice to start the year with the biggest win we could get.
Yeah. All right. Anything to say before I sign us off, John? We did it. We sub 1 hour after spending 45 minutes on the Seahawks.
That's amazing. I really thought we were going to do an hour and a half. I'm very proud of us. Yeah, I was an hour and a half late to record this podcast, and we finished in an hour. So pretty timely, all things considered.
Yes. All right. Well, for John Carey, I'm Tyler Cartwright, and this has been the Sound Up Seattle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode of Sound Up Seattle, please feel free to give us a follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Give us a 5-star review if you would be so kind. You can watch us and see our in-person reactions to the crazy things that we say on YouTube. Subscribe, like, comment, do all that stuff there at Sound Up Seattle. And then you can find the pod on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, all at Sound Up Seattle, all lowercase, all one word. You can email us your questions, comments, or concerns at soundupseattle@gmail.com. We've got a bunch of random spam PDFs from some guy named Harold today, so hopefully that doesn't happen again. And then you can find me, Tyler, at Tycar50 everywhere it's important. You can find John
tracking down this Harold character and making him pay.
And I guess with all that being said, let's go Zags. It's time. It's a Go Zags one.
Go Zags, baby.